recording. So, first things first for today, I wanted to remind everybody that your endocrine system quizzes were due today. Those of you who had turned them in before yesterday, I went through and graded those. But anyone who's gotten yours submitted today, I'll have to get those graded later on tonight or tomorrow. Be patient. What else? So the main plan for today, we are going to cover the digestive system, and we are currently in week 9. So unless I'm much mistaken, let me pull up Moodle real quick just so that I can look over the look over everything on Moodle. So we have our digestive system lecture today. We're also opening up the extra credit assignment for the diet paper. So if you want to write a paper about a diet and give me information about it, that extra credit project will be worth 10 points that I will go through your grades and just assign those 10 points wherever they will be most useful for you. Next week is the final exam, so we won't meet for class. The final's online, so I will make sure that that unlocks at the appropriate time. And let me see what it's set to now. Quiz will not be available until Thursday, June 17th. So next class, 8 a.m. and it closes the following Thursday at 1 p.m. And it's a 2-hour time limit. So when you begin the exam, you guys have 2 hours to complete it. And you guys have a week to sign into Moodle and begin the final exam. The final exam, when I was looking over it, it didn't have much to do with the nervous system. It was mainly focused on endocrine, reproductive, and digestive systems.
Is it 20 questions?
It is 20 questions, yes.
Okay.
But many of those questions would be more complicated questions, like putting events in order and things like that. So. All right.
And
do we have any?
We won't be meeting on Thursday? We won't be meeting on
Thursday because there's no, topic to cover. The only thing there is the final exam. So
okay, thank you.
we could all log into Zoom and then sit here and stare at each other while we all take the exam, but I don't feel like that would be a really good use of all of our time. So yeah, so just beginning class period next week through what would be the class day week 11. You guys have the full week to take the exam. I would recommend getting it done sooner rather than later, because the sooner you do it, then the sooner I can grade it and get your final grades into the registrars. So do we have any questions about reproductive system that we covered last week, or any other housekeeping questions before we dive into the topic for today?
Oh yeah, did you say that on week 10 we have class still next Thursday?
No class next week.
No class next week. Okay, thank you.
Today is our last Zoom meeting because next week there is no material to cover. It's just the final exam. Let me see. Next week we have there's a review for the final exam, which just gives you bullet points of things that you'll want to study. There's the final exam and the spot for you to upload your extra credit assignment. So today's the last class day. Cool beans, everybody. Good stuff. Good stuff. So today we are going to talk about the digestive system. We are going to go kind of step by step through the digestive system, looking at all of the organs and what they're doing and the secretions that they're producing and what those secretions will do. We have 2 separate slideshows to get through today. So we'll get through the first one and then we'll take our break. We'll come back and we'll finish round 2.
Dave, is it possible for you to enlarge your, yeah, I wasn't sure what to call it.
Is that better?
Your slideshow. Yes.
Yes. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the function of the digestive system. What is it that the system does for us? This is the system that allows us to ingest food and water to break down the foods and absorb the nutrients. Those nutrients will go on to be assimilated into our own body cells. We will absorb food and water, and then whatever is left over, anything that we either can't digest or the byproducts of digestion, which are poisonous or toxic to the body, will then be eliminated. And there are several organs that go into this system. So, first we have the mouth and your accessory organs like the teeth and the tongue. We have the esophagus, which is the tube that the food travels down through on its way to the stomach. The stomach chemically breaks down the food, passes it on to the small intestine. The small intestine is where most of the nutrients are actually absorbed. The food is also mixed with secretions from the liver and the pancreas to further help with the breakdown of those materials. By the time the food gets to the large intestine, most of the nutrients are already extracted. The main object of the game in the large intestine is to reclaim all the usable water and to maintain the water balance. And then by the time we reach the end of the large intestine, all of the usable water has been taken out, all the nutrients are gone. What's left is basically concentrated waste, and it gets eliminated through the rectum. So there's our general overview. We're going to dig a little bit deeper. We will begin, kind of do this magic school bus style. Like, you guys have all seen the magic school bus, right? Where they go into the body of a little redheaded kid. It's always the redhead for some reason. So we start our journey in the mouth. In the oral cavity, we have a few accessory organs that we want to pay attention to, mostly which are the teeth. The teeth are responsible for the mechanical process of digestion, the physical breaking down of the large object of food into smaller pieces, which will then be passed to the stomach. The technical medical name for chewing is called mastication. So food is masticated by the teeth. This is a mechanical process where the food is ripped and torn into smaller pieces. It is also mixed with secretions from the salivary glands. One of those secretions is the enzyme amylase. And amylase is in the saliva, and it begins the digestive process for complex carbohydrates. So complex carbs will begin to be digested in the mouth. When the food has been thoroughly chewed and mixed with saliva, the tongue kind of shapes it into a round ball called a bolus. And the bolus is then swallowed. Swallowing is a voluntary action, which is then taken over by involuntary muscles in the esophagus. So we voluntarily swallow the food using voluntary muscles, swallow the food into our pharynx. The pharynx is the back of the throat. So not to get too gross or too graphic with you guys, but you ever hocked a loogie? When you can feel the snot like pulling from the back of your nose down into your throat? That's the pharynx. That's where we are. So back in the back of the nose, down into the upper part of the throat. The pharynx is what you think of as your throat. The pharynx will then split into two divisions. One way goes to the trachea and the lungs. The other division goes down the esophagus into the digestive tract. Now, we said the act of swallowing is voluntary. Once the bolus enters the esophagus, that is taken over by an involuntary set of muscle contractions. What happens is the esophagus, kind of as it accepts the bolus, we contract the tube on top of the bolus. So we pinch the top, and this squeezes the bolus down into the stomach. So we get this rhythmic wave-like motion going on called peristalsis. Peristalsis is an involuntary, smooth muscle contraction in the esophagus, which pushes the food down the tube and into the stomach. As we arrive at the end of the esophagus, we come to an area where the tube is pinched shut. It's closed by a circular ring of muscle known as a sphincter. This particular sphincter is known as the cardiac sphincter because the entrance to your stomach is right up by your heart. When the cardiac sphincter relaxes, we open up, we allow the bolus to enter the stomach. The sphincter then recloses. We have officially entered the stomach. Good stuff, guys. Any questions so far? Cool. So within the stomach, oh, let me catch up on our PowerPoint real quick. So all of your abdominal organs are held in place by a sac of connective tissue. Specifically, this connective tissue we're looking at is fascia, but it wraps around the outside. So all of the organs are contained within this sac called the peritoneum. The outer wall is called the parietal peritoneum. The word parietal means wall. So think about where we've heard this word before. Where have we heard the word parietal before, you guys? Somebody? Anybody?
Skull. In the skull.
In the skull, exactly. Those parietal bones literally are telling you those are the wall bones. They form the walls of the cranium. So the parietal peritoneum is the outer peritoneum, the outer sac, which forms the wall that separates the inside of your abdomen from the outside of the abdomen. On the inner layer, there is the visceral peritoneum. The word visceral pertains to the abdominal organs. This is the inner layer of the sac that is adhered onto the outside of the organ itself. So almost like the organs are kind of shrink wrapped inside the sac. The visceral peritoneum lines the outside of the organs. The parietal peritoneum lines the outside of the abdominal cavity. These two membranes will be filled with fluid called serous fluid. Guys, it's very similar to that synovial fluid. It's meant to be a watery, lubricating fluid so that as your body twists and turns and moves around, your organs are able to shift and slide past each other with no friction. We cannot have any friction happening anywhere in the body. So anytime we've got structures gliding across each other, we've got to throw lubrication factors in there to make sure we cannot have any friction. For the abdominal organs, this function is performed by the peritoneum. So we talked about swallowing. Swallowing is the voluntary process, right? Where the food is transferred from the mouth into the pharynx. Once the food reaches the pharynx, the involuntary contractions of peristalsis take over. So we'll zoom into peristalsis. Here we have the contraction happening above the bolus. So the contraction pushes the bolus inferiorly from the mouth to the stomach. Now, once we get into the intestines, a different kind of contraction is taking place. This one is called segmentation. So peristalsis brings these individual bolus down the esophagus into the stomach. As these boluses are digested and transferred into the small intestine, we then have a different process called segmentation. Segmentation requires multiple contractions, which pinch off individual boli and transfer these boli along the way until they're eventually dissolved through the digestive and absorption process. So do we see the difference here, you guys? Our peristalsis is happening in the esophagus, carrying one bolus at a time as you swallow one bite of food from the mouth to the stomach. Once the stomach has done its thing, the stomach is releasing the food in new boluses into the small intestine, one after the other after the other. And each of these segments is held in place by smooth muscle contractions in this tube, and they're carried along the way until the bolus is dissolved. And I say dissolved, it's digested and absorbed into the bloodstream. Did I explain this clearly? I hope. Okay.
Yes, that makes sense.
Fantastic, fantastic. So segmentation, the food is churned by a contract, relax alternation of small intestine segments. Within our oral cavity, as I said, this is where mechanical and chemical digestion begins. Your teeth are an accessory organ. They break the food into small pieces. This is the mechanical part of digestion. Your amylase enzymes in saliva begins the chemical process of digestion. We also have your first line of defense against pathogens. This is where anything that enters the body through the mouth, we've got to make sure that it's not contaminated, right? Anyone ever had to have a tonsillectomy before? Had to have your tonsils taken out? Those are lymphatic immune organs. That's their job. That's what they do, is your tonsils and your adenoids form a ring around the pharynx. So anything that goes into the pharynx, either through the nose or through the mouth, has to eventually pass through the ring of adenoid tissue. And they're just checking and scanning with lots of white blood cells. Anything that may be contaminated or infected or pathogenic is killed. That's the point anyway, that's the hope. Now, naturally, we know some things do make it past that, but that is your first line of defense, the first checkpoint by the immune system to anything entering the body. It's actually right in your throat. The muscles of chewing are also of importance. So the primary muscles that we refer to when we're thinking about chewing, the strongest is the masseter muscle. Your masseter muscle is about 2 or 3 fingers wide, and it's right on the side of your jaw. Its origin is the inferior margin of your zygomatic arch, your cheekbone, and its insertion is on the angle and the inferior border of the mandible. So if you ever see, dudes with those really sexy square Brad Pitt jaws, right? And they cleanse their jaw and the cheekbone really sticks, or their jawbone really sticks out down here. That's what you're looking at, is the masseter muscle, the protrusion of the muscle. For guys with that really, really sharp square jaw, the angle of the mandible is actually flared outwards. So you can look at a mandible and tell if it's a boy or girl. Male mandibles have more flared angles, which is what gives men that like really, really strong, right? Like square jaw. You guys know the kind I'm talking about, right? The Brad Pitt jawline, you know what I'm talking about? That's the flaring of the mandibular angle. Anyway, not relevant, just I'm ranting. All right, masseter muscle, primary chewing. Temporalis muscle, resting on the temporal bone. It inserts on the coronoid process of the mandible. Its main action is to elevate the mandible, just like masseter. We also have the medial and lateral pterygoids. They deal with medial lateral movement of the mandible. So if you think about chewing is less of an up and down type motion and more of a grinding type motion. The pterygoids allow your jaw to get that side to side movement. And then your buccinator muscle. Oh, guys, I know this is a bit of a stretch, but the best example that I have for you for the buccinator muscle, do you guys remember that meme that was the boy wearing the SpongeBob pajamas on his mom's confused picture day and pajama day? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? So they took oh God, I've got to show you this because it's, so his mom confused pajama day for picture day and sent him to school in SpongeBob pajamas. And that was his school picture. Look at that face. Look at that face. Do you see how the cheeks are pressed in on the lips, right? Or pressed in on the teeth? That's what your buccinator muscle does. It presses the cheeks against the teeth, which helps allow you to kind of control the food in your mouth. It's also the muscle that purses your lips in that really, really fake smile. Buccinator muscle. So next we go into the oral cavity and we look at the tongue. I hear a lot of people say this when they start taking anatomy classes. The strongest muscle in the body relative to size is the tongue. I've heard that several times. I don't know if you've ever heard that before either. That is not correct. The tongue is not a muscle. The tongue is 8 separate muscles. Remember from your muscle system, guys, muscles only pull. That's all they do. So if you want your tongue to go up, you need a muscle on top to pull the muscle up, which means you need another muscle at the bottom to pull the tongue back down. and you need a muscle on the side and a muscle on the other side in order to move the tongue in all these different ways. The tongue is 8 separate muscles, but I digress. Relative to size, the strongest muscle in your body is your masseter. That's the strongest one. It can bite down with 150 pounds of biting force, which if you sink your teeth right in the joint between the two bones, you can bite off a finger. Like your jaw is strong enough to bite off a finger between the joint. So usually for a normal person, just in terms of raw strength, the strongest muscle is gluteus maximus. That tends to be the strongest muscle on most people. But relative to size, it would be the masseter. Fun fact. We've already talked about the sensory receptors, those chemoreceptors on the tongue for your taste buds. We know that they detect 5 primary tastes. Those are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is like a rich, earthy flavor. Think mushrooms or steak, things like that. Salivary glands, there are 3. Oh, this says there are 3 pairs of glands. You guys, just a few months ago, they discovered, or maybe a couple years ago, they discovered a new set of salivary glands. There's actually 4. They found a whole new set of salivary glands doing research on cancer patients. Cancer patients who take chemo, they get chronic dry mouth. So they injected a dye into their bloodstream to map where their salivary glands were so they could target treatments for them. And as a result of those studies, they ended up showing up around your eustachian tubes, those tubes coming down from your ears, there's another set of salivary glands wrapped around those. So you actually have 4 pairs of salivary glands now. This is old info. So saliva secretion is stimulated by parasympathetic nerves. Remember guys, parasympathetic system is rest and digest. So parasympathetic is gonna have to do with anything related to turning on digestion. That's a parasympathetic function. So secreting saliva, engorging the stomach, preparing for food, all that stuff, that's parasympathetic stuff. Saliva begins chemical digestion of carbohydrates and fats. It lubricates the mouth for swallowing and speech, and it provides defense through antibodies and proteins. I'm going to skip some of this, guys, because I've already talked about it, right? This is the formal slide. So there's all the info about your pharynx. If you know the pharynx is the back of your throat, that's what you need to know. That's geographically, that's where we are. Esophagus, we talked about that. The most common condition of the esophagus is GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disease. It's caused usually by a weakening in the cardiac sphincter, which allows stomach acids to reflux back up into the esophagus, and repeated long-term exposure to that kind of stomach acid can deteriorate the tissues of the esophagus. It's not designed for it, right? It's designed to carry food, not acid. The stomach can handle the acids, but not the esophagus. Many people confuse GERD with heartburn. The difference is many people get heartburn from time to time. GERD is, it's a specific kind of chronic heartburn. Like if you have heartburn most days a week and changes in your diet don't really affect it, that's a GERD situation. That's an issue with your body itself rather than normal heartburn, which is just a problem with the foods that you're eating. All right. We have finally made our way to the stomach. The stomach will store that ingested food. It also mechanically digests food. Mechanically speaking, the walls of your stomach I'm going to pull up my digestive system here so we can look at this app. Will separate layers of the stomach. There we go. So what you can see here is the grain of the different layers of smooth muscle. So we're able to constrict the stomach both sideways and top to bottom. So as the food is being mixed with hydrochloric acids and other digestive enzymes in the stomach, the stomach itself is squeezing and changing shape to churn and mix the food all around. Oh, one more thing, guys, since we're here. I can zoom us into the stomach. I gotta angle it just right. But there's the cardiac sphincter. There's just a little ring of muscle that separates the stomach from the esophagus. So once the stomach has done its job thoroughly breaking the food down into more basic parts, mixing them with digestive enzymes and whatnot, we've produced from the food and from the stomach juices a very nutritious, kind of creamy substance that we call chyme. Chyme, it rhymes with time. Also, it is misspelled here on this slideshow. It is spelled chyme, C-H-Y-M-E, not chime. It rhymes with time. Chyme, a nutritious fluid derived from the mixture of foods and stomach juices. It is this chyme that is then secreted into the small intestine for further digestion. Now, what the stomach has done is taken the 3 primary macronutrients, the nutrients that you need large amounts of every day, and broken them down into their component parts. So we have 2 main divisions of nutrients. We have the macronutrients and micronutrients. Macros, you need, like I said, in large amounts every day. Micronutrients are those that you need smaller amounts of every day. For macronutrients, you have the big 3. Those are protein, carbohydrates, and fats. For micronutrients, you're looking at things like vitamins and minerals, right? Vitamin A, C, B, minerals, selenium, magnesium, copper, iron. These are things that you generally need trace amounts of, which is why they're called micronutrients. Now, proteins will be broken down using enzymes into their component parts. Do you guys remember what the component parts of proteins are called? What are the components of protein?
Amino acids.
Amino acids. Fats will be broken down into their component parts. Those are usually called fatty acids. But we're looking at things like diglycerides, triglycerides, things of that nature. And then carbohydrates. Carbohydrates come in 2 flavors. We have simple and complex. What we're talking about is the length of the sugar molecule. If the sugar molecule is very short, it is a simple carbohydrate. Complex carbohydrates have very long chain sugars. So when you think of simple carbohydrates, you're thinking about traditional sugar and candy and cakes and pastries and things like that, icing and sweets. With complex carbohydrates, you're thinking about starches. Think about everything at the bottom of the food pyramid: bread, rice, cereal, pasta, right? Wheat, grains, all types of baked goods like croissants and muffins and rolls and anything with yeast for leavening and flatbreads and pizza crusts and things like that.
Well, all the good things.
Of course. But the takeaway from this, you guys, is yes, complex carbohydrates take longer to digest. It takes the body more effort to break them down. But once we have broken them down, we break them down into simple carbohydrates. Carbs are carbs are carbs. They are all sugars. They are all broken down into sugars. Some, like bread and pasta, take a little bit longer. Some, like candy, or if you just eat like granulated sugar, Doesn't take long at all. Your body can assimilate sugar very fast. Complex carbs takes a little bit of digestion, a little breaking down, but we break them down into sugars. It's the same stuff. So the stomach secretes enzymes, namely pepsin. Pepsin begins the chemical digestion of proteins. So if we look at the enzymes that the pancreas is releasing, guys, one of the shortcuts, if you see a word that ends in ASE, like amylase or lipase or protease, that ending ASE is indicating we're talking about an enzyme. ACE words, they're all enzymes. So amylase is the enzyme we mentioned earlier. It begins the breakdown of complex carbohydrates. Lipase begins the breakdown of fats, right? The word for fat is lip or lipo, right? Lipids. And then protease is enzymes that break down protein. So in this way, they're really named spot on. Now, the pancreas also secretes hormones, which we'll talk about those in a few more minutes. We're not quite at the pancreas just yet. But here we have the whole hormonal cycle as to what's going on. When we spot food, that sensory stimulation in our brain, right? When you see a juicy steak or a garden fresh salad or whatever it is that makes your mouth water, your brain sends a stimulation through parasympathetic nerve fibers into the stomach and the small intestine. The stomach begins to relax and engorge. The intestines begin to dilate and get larger. They're anticipating the arrival of food. The stomach releases a hormone called gastrin, which begins to promote the production of stomach acids. The intestine begins releasing hormones like secretin and CCK, which stimulate the production of pancreatic juice from the pancreas and bile from the liver. One more side note over here, guys. Anything that ends in ASE is telling you it's an enzyme. If it ends in OSE, it's telling you it's a sugar. So dextrose, sucrose, fructose, glucose, galactose. Galactose is a sugar that's found in breast milk. Any of those words that you see ending in OSE, it's just some version of sugar. Now, since we're looking at the stomach and we're talking about the production of stomach acids, the primary acid that your stomach utilizes is hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid in its raw form has a pH of 1. And I don't know if you guys remember much about your pH scale, but that scale goes from 1 to 14, with 7 being right in the middle. 7 is neutral. 1 is about as acidic as you can get. Raw hydrochloric acid will clean car oil off your driveway. I mean, it will eat through almost anything. Now your body, your stomach mixes that with a lot of bicarbonate atoms, a lot of basically baking soda. So your body produces basically baking soda to help neutralize the acid, to bring the pH down a little bit, but you're still talking about an extremely acidic environment. So how does the stomach not just digest itself from the inside out? Well, part of the answer is it does, effectively, it does. But if you remember how your skin grows in layers that die on their way up, so the topmost layer is dead, the stomach pulls the same stunt. The more buried layer is alive, and so as they grow inwards towards the inside of the stomach, the inner lining of the stomach that actually touches the outside, most of those cells are dead. They've also added a layer of mucus on the inside, which protects it. So when we see things like stomach ulcers, what's happened is that a bacterium has invaded and started to deteriorate the mucus lining, which means now the actual lining of the stomach is exposed to the stomach acids, which causes the lining to begin to break down. That is what a stomach ulcer is. The old school thinking was that they were caused by stress. They are not, in fact, caused by stress. They are correlated with stress, because when you get stressed out, your immune function tanks. And when your immune system goes down, it allows a bacterial infection like this to take place. The cause of most ulcers is a bacterial infection. If you go on antibiotics, it'll clear up your ulcer infection. Generally, it's a bacteria known as H. pylori. Another important secretion of the stomach is a chemical called intrinsic factor. That's the name of it. I didn't pick it, guys. I'm sorry, but that's just its name. Intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is produced by the stomach. It aids the body in absorbing vitamin B12. It's almost like almost like sugar and insulin. It has to be bound with something in order to be taken into the cell membrane. So if we fail to absorb B12 because the stomach is failing to produce intrinsic factor, it results in a condition called pernicious anemia. B12 is used to make red blood cells. So if you can't bind and assimilate with B12, you can't make blood cells. That makes you anemic. Usually the treatment for pernicious anemia is they just B12 supplements, like usually the drops you put under your tongue, and it provides B12 for you.
So does iron help with B12, like to absorb it and stuff like that? Because I know that when I've had like my blood tested and stuff like that, they always tell me like that I'm anemic or I have low iron, and they tell me to have more iron before I give blood because it helps up my blood count and everything.
Yes. So first of all, iron deficiencies tend to be more prevalent in women than in men, because women bleed regularly once a month. So you lose blood, and that makes you low on iron. So, but I don't know if the iron and the B12 are related. I know that iron is required for the production of hemoglobin, which is the protein that red blood cells use to actually bind to oxygen. So without enough iron, you don't have the tool that you need to make a proper red blood cell. I know that the intrinsic factor is also used to bind to vitamin B12, but I don't know that the two are related. But any decrease in the amount of blood in your body is anemia. We measure it by checking your iron levels. But even people who just get into kind of a traumatic accident, right? And you lose a limb or something, and you're losing a lot of blood, that is still technically anemia. We define it as low iron, but in fact, you've lost a lot of blood. And if you give the body time, it will replenish its blood supply. So because of the menstrual cycle and the regular loss of blood, women are often advised to incorporate sources of iron in their diet. One of the better sources is red meat, but there are plenty of vegan or vegetarian ways of getting iron into your diet. Green leafy vegetables, kale, chard, dark greens, so spinach, kale, chard, those kinds of things, all are very, very rich in iron.
Okay, awesome. I just didn't know if they like had a thing together with B12 and iron or not.
I don't know if they do or not. Good question. All right. So next up, we are going to, so once the stomach is done with its deal, right? We have chemically broken down the food, we've mechanically broken down the food, we've mixed it with hydrochloric acid and pepsin and lots of other enzymes, and now we've reached this kind of creamy substance called chyme. Now the stomach will release for transfer onto the small intestine. So we entered the stomach through the cardiac sphincter. We leave the stomach through the pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter separates the stomach from the small intestine. And in the small intestine, there is a party going on. And anyone who has been to a really good party knows every good party has to have a DJ. The best DJ in the digestive tract is DJ Ill. DJ Ill, he's dropping a sick beat, dropping the poops. The small intestine has three main sections: DJ Ill, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. So the small intestine is where most of the real digestion is taking place. The stomach has produced the chemicals that we need, but most of the actual breakdown and the absorption of those materials, most of that happens in the small intestine. The inner structure is studded with little structures called villi. So if you imagine a tube, the inside of a tube, right? You would imagine the inside of the tube looks something like this. But we are absorbing materials from the fluid into the bloodstream, which means we need to bring the substance into close contact with a lot of blood vessels, which means we need a lot of surface area. So the name of the game, instead of leaving these nice, smooth tubes, no, we don't want to do that. What we will do instead is create protrusions, like little finger-like projections on the inside of the tube. So now our food, our chyme, which I'm going to color in green, now can wash over each of these structures, each of these villi. We have increased the surface area for absorption. Now, this cool little trick gets even cooler, because if we take one of those villi and we blow it up and zoom into it, right, you would imagine it just looks like a smooth little lump sticking up from the bottom. No, when you zoom way in, it itself is covered all the way around by other tiny little villi called microvilli. So we have not doubled, we have not tripled, we have more than quadrupled the available surface area. Within each of those little microvilli, each of those tiny little lumps, there is a delicate little crisscrossing of blood vessels. Delicate little arteries and veins, all bringing the blood into very close contact with the chyme. What we've set up is another concentration gradient. You guys remember how the lungs work, right? You have a lot of something on one side and not a lot of the same thing on the other side of some kind of semi-permeable membrane. Diffusion is just going to happen. It's a natural process. We don't have to expend any energy. You bring nutrient-laden fluids in close contact with nutrient-poor blood. You set up a concentration gradient, stuff will diffuse. So nutrients will diffuse out of the small intestine and into the bloodstream. Now the blood is rich with nutrients, and that will be distributed all the way around the body. Good stuff? Good stuff. So we said the small intestine is divided into three main sections. DJ Ill, dropping the poops. The duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The duodenum is the large lobby. It's the beginning of the tube where everything enters into. The duodenum receives the chyme and the bile and the pancreatic enzymes. So when the pancreas and the liver are secreting their stuff and the stomach is turning over the chyme that it has just digested, all of those materials come together in the duodenum. That is the little purple section up here. We can see it runs kind of behind the large intestine a little bit. Then we move into the second section, colored in pink, the jejunum. The jejunum is where most of the digestion takes place, where all of these things are truly broken down into their very smallest parts. The ileum, the distal portion, continues digestion, and this is where most of the absorption happens. This is where, in this blue section, is where your nutrients are fully broken down into their constituent parts: amino acids, fatty acids, simple sugars, and those are diffused into the bloodstream. Now, we've said that the pancreas and the liver are also contributing secretions, we're going to take a look at the pancreas for a moment. Now, before we move on, I want to describe the tube situation we have going on here. If you look at the green tube is the bile duct. The bile duct, remember, duct is just a fancy word for tube, and the tube is named after what it's carrying. So the bile duct is the tube for bile. Bile is produced by the liver. It is stored in the gallbladder. So both the liver and the gallbladder have tubes that join here. So since the liver and the gallbladder are both using this tube to transfer bile, and as you can see here, the tube passes through the pancreas. The pancreas also uses it. It is called the common bile duct because 3 separate organs are all using the same tube to squirt their secretions into the duodenum of the small intestine. Now, the pancreas also has its own tube for the things that it makes that it does not share with the liver. The main tube from the pancreas is, aptly enough named, the main pancreatic duct. And the stuff that the pancreas produces are naturally called pancreatic juices. There you have it. So, multiple organs are transferring bile using the common bile duct. Only the pancreas is transferring pancreatic juices using the main pancreatic duct. Both of these ducts are secreting into the duodenum of the small intestine. So, the pancreas is unique because it has both an endocrine and an exocrine function. We'll recall exocrine glands used ducts to secrete stuff through a tube into what we called the outer surface of the body. And normally we were thinking about things like sweat and sebaceous glands and salivary glands, right? Because the inside of the mouth is technically outside the body. But guys, remember, your digestive tract is just a long tube of outside contained within your body. You're just a big donut. So when we secrete into the duodenum of the small intestine, you're secreting into a closed pocket of outside. You're still outside the body. So, exocrine function. But the pancreas also secretes things like glucagon and insulin, and it secretes those directly into the bloodstream without a tube, hence the endocrine function. Your liver, another important organ for digestion. Now, the liver is the largest organ in the abdomen. Quite frankly, it's the largest internal organ that you have. But I would like to make a very brief distinction. Oops, I'm going to change my color real quick. The liver is the largest organ you have in your body. It is the largest internal organ. The skin is the largest organ of the body. The skin is the largest organ that you have. The liver is just the largest one you have inside of you. Good stuff. Minor distinction. I just want to be clear because you'll hear people say the skin is the largest organ, and then you'll hear people say the liver is the largest organ. They're not wrong. I just want to make the distinction. The liver is the largest internal organ. The skin is just the largest organ, period. The skin, when you take it off the body and like lump it up somewhere, it's ungodly huge, guys. You just have so much skin. You don't even understand. So, liver, the largest organ in the abdomen. Its main digestive function is to produce bile. That is its job. Produce bile, and if you make too much, store it in the gallbladder. We'll save it for later. That's what it does. Bile is useful because it helps break down fats. That is what it does. It breaks down fats. It also processes blood that it receives through its primary artery, which is called the hepatic portal. Now, the liver, the word for liver, right? When you think about brain, you think of like cerebe or cerebro. When you think about heart, you think cardi or cardio. When you think lungs, you think, pulmo or pulmonary. When you think of the liver, the word is hepa or hepat or hepato. So when we talk about the hepatic portal, we're talking about the liver. This is telling you exactly where it is. It's the entryway for all of the blood to come into the liver, and the liver then processes the blood. Bile and the secretions of the liver are important for digestion of everything that we do. Bile mainly does lipids, fats, but it's also producing enzymes that help break down proteins and carbohydrates. So you really couldn't do without the liver. Oh, the liver is also the only internal organ that will regenerate. You can donate a lobe of your liver into somebody and they will grow a whole new liver from it. It's fun stuff. The liver also produces important plasma proteins, meaning proteins that belong in your blood plasma. Things like albumin, blood clotting factors, which it synthesizes from vitamin K, lipoproteins. So lipoproteins are fat binding proteins. These are proteins that bind to fats to do stuff with them, like creating cell membranes or storing them as adipose tissue, fun stuff. Your liver also scans for old pathogens, old red blood cells that are nearing the end of their life. It's sensitive to hormone fluctuations. It's also producing a chemical called bilirubin. And fun fact, but this is where it comes from. Bilirubin is the material that makes your poop brown. That's what that is. Fun. There you go. The liver detoxifies substances. So the liver is armed with an array of enzymes that it is capable of creating in order to detoxify random toxins that it encounters in its environment. This is one of the ones that I personally, me, Dave Holden, as a person, my personal opinion, myself. This is one of the things that irritates me the most about those bullshit, like detox diets or the detox cleanse, and you're drinking freaking like lemon water and cayenne pepper for a week to like detox your body. If you have a functioning liver, your body detoxes itself. A normal liver, that's what the liver does. You do not need to detox your liver. You do not need to detox your digestive system. None of that stuff. You're paying for really expensive pee. That's all you're doing. If your liver is healthy, your body detoxes itself, all by itself. When you drink alcohol, your body begins to produce a new enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. As you can see by the ending, it's an enzyme. Your liver produces alcohol dehydrogenase in the presence of alcohol, and it allows your body to sequester and metabolize the alcohol. It's what makes alcohol not alcohol anymore, so that your body can metabolize and get rid of it. You guys have all gone through alcohol education. You know it takes your body 1 hour to get rid of one beer or one glass of wine or one shot of alcohol. You guys know what I'm talking about? It takes 1 hour to process. This is what we're talking about. It takes your liver 1 hour to produce enough alcohol dehydrogenase to metabolize one alcoholic beverage, one glass of beer or one glass of wine or one shot of liquor. That's why being drunk, it takes a while to get drunk, and then you stay drunk after you're drinking, and then you feel so crappy the next morning. This is all the liver's doing. You've poisoned yourself, and now the liver has to work to detoxify the body.
Hey, Dave.
Yo.
When the pancreas is releasing the hormone and it's way into the bloodstream, right? Is it going that same route, the hepatic? Oh no, it's going into arteries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not going to the liver as its like first stop. No, okay.
No, it's going into the small intestine. Your liver, the blood going into the liver is like when you drink alcohol. That's the blood. The liver is taking in a huge amount of blood in order to purify and detoxify it. That's the hepatic portal. Whereas the pancreas is putting hormones into the bloodstream just in the arteries nearby it. Mm-hmm. Good question. All right. So we know that the liver produces bile. That's one of its main functions. It will often overproduce bile, which is cool. We have a little pouch on the side. The gallbladder. its function is to store excess bile. That's literally what it's there for. So as the bile is produced in the liver, it is transferred down the hepatic duct, literally translated, the liver tube. So the secretion of the liver travels down the liver tube. Some of it may be stored in the gallbladder. Other bile will continue past the gallbladder, joining the bit of the tube that they all share, the common bile duct. So pay attention, guys. Remember, the body doesn't give a shit what we call it. The body's doing its thing. We are the ones going around drawing dotted lines and putting names on stuff. We call the top part of the tube the hepatic duct because it's the part that's in the liver. We call the lower part the common bile duct because this is a tube that multiple organs all use together. They all use the same tube to send their stuff down the stream, right? But there is no structural difference. We are just drawing a dotted line and naming a border, or naming two things across a border. So what I want you to know about the gallbladder, it stores and concentrates bile, which is formed by the liver.
So when people get things like kidney stones and gallstones, that's like crystallized, what, sodium,
Yes.
something?
Calcium usually.
Calcium.
Calcium usually, and phosphorus. So gallstones and kidney stones, although they happen in different organs and they have different symptoms and things like that, they're usually pretty much made out of the same stuff, but they look very different. Oops. A kidney stone looks like it's freaking painful. Like when you see kidney stones and you imagine something like that passing through your urethra, you understand why they are so hated and reviled. Like kidney stones are the worst. Gallstones are also painful, but gallstones themselves actually look much more rounded. The issue is that they become impacted. Like they fill the gallbladder until the gallbladder becomes swollen and distended with them. And there you go. That's what they look like. But
So
they can grow, to fill the gallbladder because the gallbladder is not that big. It's like the size of your thumb. Like it's only meant to hold a small amount of bile, right? I mean, it's not enormous. So if it gets, like this guy's hand, if it gets fully impacted, then it can't function anymore. It's so full of stones that it can't store bile. Usually what has to happen then is you have to have what's called a cholestomectomy, where they remove the gallbladder. So you don't have a gallbladder anymore. But you also can't store bile, which means your diet has to change. You no longer have the amount of bile you need to digest a lot of fats. So you have to go on a really, really low fat diet because you don't have the fluid that you need to digest fats anymore. And you have to go on the gallbladder diet.
So what are those, and why does the body do that? Is that like a way, is that like a defense mechanism?
No, it's usually, okay, so gallstones are hardened deposits of digestive fluid. They are thought to develop because of an imbalance in the chemical makeup of bile inside the gallbladder. In most cases, the levels of cholesterol in bile become too high and the excess cholesterol forms into stones. Gallstones are very common. When you see that word cholesterol or diglycerides or triglycerides, you're just talking about varieties of fats, right? You're just talking about different flavors and forms of lipids. So if the mixture of cholesterol in the bile gets too high, then the fat will harden and it hardens into stones.
Could you say that eating high fat diet could increase the possibility of getting gallbladder disease?
Yes. Yes. Now, I will refine that answer by saying, if you are making other dietary changes, then you may avoid the negative results. And let me just clarify what I mean. Like Atkins diet, for example. You guys are familiar with the Atkins diet. It's low carb. So what you're trying to do there is lower your intake of carbohydrates, which your body uses for energy. But now what you're trading is you eat a lot more fats because your body is now burning fat for its primary fuel source instead of sugars. So if that is what you're doing, then you can avoid these dangers of eating so much fat, because as long as sugar is your body's first choice, always, period. And if your body can burn carbohydrates, it will burn carbs first, always. They are very quick and easy and cheap to access. It doesn't take your body a whole lot of resources to burn sugar. It takes a lot of resources to burn fats. There are whole chains of enzymes and chemicals that your liver has to create in order to burn fat. Your body will not do it as long as carbohydrates are available. So this is where things like the keto diet come into play. With keto diet, it's even more strict than Atkins. You are severely limiting your intake of carbohydrates so that your body will begin making the changes necessary and producing the ketones necessary to begin to burn fat for fuel. Once you reach that stage, now you're what they call fat adapted. Your diet includes an insane amount of fat. 75% of your calories come from fat on the keto diet, but 5% come from carbs. Just to put this into perspective, guys, for the typical American diet, half of your calories come from carbohydrates, about 20 or 30% come from proteins, and the remainder comes from fat. So here you're usually looking at somewhere like 30, we're talking about 50, 20, something along those lines. With the keto diet, you're changing your ratios to 5% from carbs, 20% protein, and the remaining 75% of your calories come from healthy fats. Healthy fats like avocados and plant-based fats like avocados. You're talking about animal-based fats like dairy products. But again, the whole purpose there is you can't allow carbohydrates to become available to your body because your body will kick yourself out of ketosis and straight back to sugar burning mode. Anyway, that was a digression.
So would that mean that keto diet is bad for you?
No, the purpose of keto
Okay.
diet is to burn stored fat.
So it shouldn't bother your gallbladder then?
No. Some people may have sensitivities in the beginning because you are dramatically increasing your intake of fat. But remember that not only, you got to remember the other side of that coin, right? Yes, you are eating an insane amount of fat, but your fat is the only thing your body now has for fuel. So you're burning the fat. You're burning it. You know what I'm saying? You're eating an insane amount of fat, but you're balancing it out. Like that's your calories. That's where it comes from, right? A little bit of protein to rebuild, your own structures, but the energy is coming from burning fat because sugar is no longer available. There is no sugar in your body. You have depleted your stores of stored sugar. Your muscles store a small amount of glycogen to fuel muscle contractions. Your liver stores glycogen. Your pancreas, a lot of your brain cells will store sugar as a way to make sure they have energy source nearby. But the process of getting into ketosis has depleted all of those. You've starved your body everywhere. All the cupboards are empty. You have no sugar left. Now your body has no choice but to burn fat. And so that's where your energy is coming from. You're eating insane amounts of fat, but your body's burning it.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Is that why a lot
Now-
of people stop their keto, like they start trying to do keto and after a handful of days, they're like, I feel like crap. This is really hard. I don't want to do this because their body is like trying to switch over.
What's happening is, okay, I just want to put a pin right here. This is a digression away from our main topic, okay? But the main thing is that sugar is addictive. And we say that we understand this, but we really behave as though we do not understand this. Sugar is addictive, and your body becomes addicted to the sugar. And think about how much sugar is in your Starbucks drinks. There's hidden sugar in buns, like hamburger and hot dog buns. There's hidden sugar in ketchup. There's sugar in everything. So what happens is when people start the keto diet, usually what happens is the body starts to go into carbohydrate withdrawal, and you get headaches, and you're tired, and you get mood swings, and you're grouchy, and it's no fun. That's where most people call it quits. If you push past the what they call the keto flu, it's when you're withdrawing from carbohydrates, the next thing you'll enter into as you begin the state of ketosis, where your body is producing ketones. The root molecule of ketones is acetone, right? So if you guys spend any time in a nail salon, acetone is nail polish remover. So as you begin to go into ketosis, unfortunately, one of the signs that you have entered ketosis is you start getting really stank breath. It's the acetone on your breath that your liver is producing. It goes away after a few days. But the whole thing start to finish usually takes about 2 weeks to go through the whole like purge, withdrawal, enter ketosis mode. And then after 2 weeks or so, you're fully in ketosis and your body starts really doing a lot better. But this only works if you are cutting off your source of carbohydrates. You cannot have sugar, right? You have to completely stop the sugar. If you are eating a traditional American diet and you are allowing the sugar in your diet as well as high amounts of fat, your body will always burn sugar first. So anything else that's left over, all the fat that you're eating will not get burned. It will get stored, right? So the only way to make the keto diet work is, the whole premise of it is, you have got to stop the sugar. And all sugars are sugar. So whether it's coming from the bottom of the food pyramid or the top of the food pyramid, whether you're talking about bread or pasta or cake, it all has to go. The keto diet is composed mainly of simple whole foods: meat, cheese, dairy, beans, nuts, lots and lots of vegetables, and very, very little fruit, because fruit has sugar. Good stuff. That was enough of a rant. That took us far enough off topic. So yes, gallstones can be caused by high amounts of fat in the diet. However, it is not usually associated with the keto diet because those fats are not being stored. They are in fact being burned. So they don't have a chance to accumulate anywhere. Good question. Whew. My goodness, you guys ask such good questions. Where were we?
And sorry, just to clarify that.
Yeah.
So the stones in the body is just a calcified fat.
For gallstones, I wouldn't say the word calcified, but yes,
That.
it's solidified fat.
Solidified
Yes, cholesterol. Yes. All right. So as we pass through the small intestine, right? DJ ill, dropping the poops, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. When we reach the end of the ileum, most of the nutrients are gone. Your body has absorbed them. Most of all the good stuff your body has already absorbed. What is left over is a lot of waste and a lot of water. So from the ileum of the small intestine, we pass through yet another sphincter called the ileocecal valve. It is the valve between the ileum and the cecum. The cecum is the lobby of the large intestine. It is the first little pouch-like structure that we enter as we exit the small intestine and enter the large. By the way, another name for the large intestine is the colon. They are interchangeable. You can use whichever word you prefer. Colon, large intestine, same thing. Now, as we look here, we can see the little tail end of our ileum. It opens up to the ileocecal valve, and now we are in the cecum. The cecum is this entire little pouch-like structure. At this point, we in our little magic school bus have a choice. We can either go down or we can go up. If we go down, we head into a structure called the vermiform appendix. The word vermiform means worm-like, of or resembling a worm or a tube or a cylinder. The appendix was long thought to be a vestigial organ which did not serve a purpose. We now know that it does in fact serve a purpose. It has several actually. It stores tiny remnants of indigestible materials. When people's appendixes burst, we've gone in there and done dissections and see what's in there. And it's weird shit, you guys, weird stuff you find in the appendix. Things like bits of fingernails that people have bitten, strands of hair that they've swallowed, bits of like peanut shells and other like nut shells made of dense cellulose that your body can't digest. But another interesting thing that we find in there, do you guys remember, I may have gone on this rant with you guys earlier, and if I have, please let me know so we can move on. But we talked about the bacteria that live in your large intestine and how doctors will prescribe you antibiotics, but then they don't tell you to go on probiotics afterwards. Did we go on this? Did they talk about this?
Yeah, I remember.
Okay. So do you remember when we talked about antibiotics wipe out all your gut bacteria? Your appendix is like a thumb drive. It keeps a backup copy, a small colony of the various bacteria that were populating you. So after like a round of antibiotics or a major infection or a bout of diarrhea or things like that, you've got a backup copy, a thumb drive, where we can repopulate our gut bacteria from the sample that lives in your appendix, which means it has an important immune function. So it is not a vestigial organ. It actually is rather useful, but you can totally live without it. So if we end up in the appendix, it is a dead end. And our journey here stops and you just live the rest of your days, in the appendix. So that's not a really fun story. So we're going to continue on. As we move up, we enter the first official segment of the large intestine. The large intestine is divided into several main segments. And these segments are, as we said earlier, we have the cecum and the appendix. We have the ascending colon, which arises on the right side of your body. Your right side is your ascending colon. Right around the bottom of your rib cage. Oh, I'm an old man. Hold on, let me stand up. Right along the bottom of your rib cage is the transverse colon. The material is passing from right to left. We then take a sharp downward turn and begin the descending colon. This is on the left side of your body. This is my left. Then we enter an S-shaped curvature heading down towards the pelvic floor. That is known as the sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon turns and becomes the rectum. The rectum is only about the final 6 to 8 inches or so. It is what defines the rectum, guys, is the change in direction. When the tube turns from transversely oriented to inferiorly oriented. At that turn, we begin the rectum. And the rectum terminates in another pair of sphincter muscles known as the anus. The anus is a double set. The internal sphincter is involuntary. It is totally controlled by the brain. The external sphincter is voluntary. And it is getting those two sphincters, the voluntary and the involuntary, trying to get those two to match up. That is what potty training is. That is literally the whole process, is training a person to control the voluntary sphincter. Hold it until you're on the toilet. That's what we teach, 2-year-olds. Allegedly.
And then someone with transverse organs, that would just be the opposite side, right?
Yes. Yeah. Now this, I want to stress, this is exceedingly rare, but many people will have their organs flipped. So there are specific structural differences between your right and left lungs so that you can identify which lung is left and which one is right. People with the condition that you're talking about, their lungs are swapped, your heart is rotated in place, your liver, your spleen, those are located on opposite sides. It literally what happened is in utero during the embryological development, the template for your organs, like what was going to become your organs, it just rotated around. So they have all the same organs, they're just installed backwards, but the system works. But yes, for one of those people, yes, it would be a mirror image.
So what if someone
But
has IBS?
we don't learn about the rare cases. We don't learn about the rare cases, guys. We focus on the textbook cases. All right, so the last 6 inches. I'm sorry, did I miss a question? Was somebody speaking?
Yeah, I was wondering, what if someone has IBS?
Ooh, so IBS. I don't know. Okay, I don't know much about IBS in particular. It's my understanding that it has some autoimmune causes to it, but I really don't know much about that one. I know a little bit more about Crohn's disease. I know a little bit about diverticulitis. I know a little bit about what was the other one? What's the one where people are gluten sensitive?
Celiac?
Thank you, celiac. Thank you, celiac. Yes, but I don't know much about IBS other than they believe that it has an autoimmune cause. I really don't know much about it. All right, so rectum is approximately the last 6 inches of your GI tract. It opens to the exterior, to the outside via the anus, which, as we said, is controlled by a pair of sphincters. Feces is composed primarily of undigested food, usually cellulose from plant fibers. Cellulose is a material that your body just, we can't break it down. We can't break it down. We can't do anything with it. So it just passes through. You're probably more familiar with cellulose as sawdust. Unfortunately, food manufacturers are able to include a fairly generous amount of sawdust in your food and still technically call it food. Those are most prevalent in items like pre-shredded cheeses, particularly shredded pre-grated Parmesan. I would not recommend the pre-grated Parmesan. I would go with a hard block because they can mix up to 10% cellulose, which is sawdust. They can also list it as an anti-caking agent to keep the cheese from clumping together, but please make no mistake, it's just sawdust. And usually they can include up to 10%. So grate your own Parmesan, please. All right, feces. We have undigested food, usually cellulose. We have sloughed off epithelial cells. So just like your skin, right, that top layer that tends to shed off, well, inside your mouth, like the skin of your mouth and your throat and the skin inside your stomach and the intestines, all that stuff sloughs too. So all your other inner dead skin cells, that gets all picked up. Inorganic material, other things that your body just like can't digest, things like peanut shells or things like magnets. If you swallow a coin or swallow a magnet, that stuff will pass on through. There have always been, the people who inadvertently swallow like a wedding ring and you have to wait for it to come up again. Bacteria, water, as well as fat and fat derivatives. Go into my fridge to rid myself of sawdust. Yeah, if you look on your ingredients on the pre-made sawdust, if you see it on there, you'll see it straight up, it says cellulose. It's a whole ingredient. And when you see that, you throw it away. Yep. Just buy a brick of Parmesan. It's not that expensive. Grate it yourself.
I took a nutrition class a handful of years ago, maybe 6 years ago, just for fun. And that was one of the things we learned. And anytime anybody's like, well, I made this with Parmesan, I'm like, did you buy a bag of it? Because I'm not eating that. If so, it's like, I know what's in there and it's gross.
Do the same thing with other types of shredded cheeses. So you guys know like the Mexican style, like 4 cheese, shredded cheese blend type stuff. They do the same thing. They do the same thing to that. All that pre-shredded cheese, it's mixed with cellulose and sawdust to keep it from clumping together. Have you ever taken a block of cheese, like a block of regular cheese, and grated and shredded it? You notice how that cheese sticks together? That's fresh cheese. If you buy a bag of pre-shredded cheese and you like run your fingers through it and it stays perfectly shredded, it's been dusted with something like cellulose just to keep it from caking up. Do it yourself. Do it yourself. I married a chef. Listen to my advice. Grate your own cheese. You will thank yourself for the effort.
Oh, that does make sense because it is kind of like floury feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And for people who are really trying to watch their carbohydrates, like people who are on keto, pre-shredded cheese, that crap adds a lot of carbs. If you just grate your own cheese, you get none of them. Good talk. Good talk. All right, moving on. Intestinal flora, right? The flora and fauna, the plants that we encounter, the bacteria that enter either through the anus or more typically they enter through the ileum. You ate them and now they're coming along the way. Now, these kinds of bacteria, we've talked about them before, right? This is a symbiotic relationship. They scratch our back, we scratch theirs. We give them free room and board. They poop out nutrients that they can't use and are vital to us. This makes me want to pull up another deal since we're talking about nutrients and nutrition. I want to define one term real quick. When we talk about essential nutrients, right? You buy a supplement or some kind of health food and it says, you know, contains 9 essential vitamins and minerals, or it contains 9 essential amino acids. Who can tell me what it means when we say an essential nutrient?
It means your body does not produce it by itself.
Fantastic. Your body does not produce it on its own. Therefore, you must obtain it from the diet. There is no other way to get the nutrients that you need. Essential nutrients must be obtained through the diet. Thanks, Kev. Travis, I'm sorry. All right, large intestine. The other main function here is defecation. So we have another little reflex arc going on here. What happens is fecal matter moves into the rectum. The presence of the fecal matter causes the walls to expand. It is called distension. So as the walls become distended from the influx of fecal matter, that stretching affects the stretch receptors in the muscle, and they send feedback through a sensory neuron to the nervous system. The nervous system registers that and says, oh, this part is being stretched, so we need to then do this, and issues a motor command. The motor command travels down to the rectum and engages the smooth muscle to begin pushing the fecal matter against the inner sphincter. Remember, that inner sphincter is involuntary. So when it starts to get pushed on, it tends to relax. The external sphincter is under voluntary control. And if you are, say, stuck in traffic on your way home and doing your little gotta get home real quick dance, it is the external sphincter that you are hoping to God to just keep a little bit of control of just for a few more minutes until you can like run inside and run upstairs. When you are finally in position and you relax the external sphincter, the natural kind of peristaltic action that we saw in the small intestine is the same kind of contraction that we will see in the rectum. The fecal matter is squeezed from the top and pushed like a tube of toothpaste all the way out. Next stop, the American Standard. So anything that is related to rest, digestion, elimination, these are all parasympathetic functions. So the parasympathetic nervous system stimulates digestive secretion. It stimulates the motor commands for defecation. All of that stuff is going on with the parasympathetic system. Last thing we'll cover here is the parasympathetic defecation reflex. So again, we're just looking at the nervous system stages of what's going on during defecation. So first we receive a stimulus, right? The feces enters the rectum, the walls become distended, the stretch receptors become stimulated by that stretch, and they send a signal along an afferent nerve fiber, which terminates at the spinal cord at the level of S2 and S4. So right around your sacrum, the signal plugs into the spinal cord. Once we are in the central nervous system, the pelvic parasympathetic nerves carry the motor command along an efferent nerve fiber now to the smooth muscle cells of the descending sigmoid and rectum. So the descending sigmoid and rectum begin to contract, pushing the material inferiorly down the rectum towards the anus. As these peristaltic waves force the feces toward the rectum, the internal anal sphincter relaxes. Now, the external sphincter is under your control. So if you are not in position, we can hold off on this particular end chapter. But if not, we just bear down and maintain control of the external sphincter, and you hold it until you can. Good stuff? All right. So before we take our break, we're going to do a very brief recap. So teeth, tongue, salivary glands, these are all accessory organs of the digestive system. They begin the process of digestion in the mouth, and these are both processes of mechanical digestion as well as chemical digestion. Food is masticated by the teeth. Masticated is the medical word for chewing. We then swallow, which is a voluntary response, and we swallow the food into the pharynx, which is the back of your throat. Once the food oh, sorry, I missed one. A bolus. We shape the food into a ball called a bolus. We swallow the bolus. When it enters the pharynx, it is then taken over by smooth muscle contractions called peristalsis, which takes place in the esophagus. The esophagus terminates in the cardiac sphincter. Your heart is located right in the center of your chest. Your stomach is located where your ribs come together, right about here. So the cardiac sphincter is right around the area of your xiphoid process. It's right in the center of your chest. This is why reflux is called heartburn. This is why the sphincter is called the cardiac sphincter. You could literally just like look out the window and see the heart. It's right there. Cardiac sphincter leads to the stomach. The stomach itself is lined with smooth muscle. It will move and grind and churn the food, mix it with digestive juices and acidic secretions before passing the food, which is now called chyme, through the pyloric sphincter. So the stomach secretes chyme through the pyloric sphincter, and we have officially entered the small intestine. The small intestine is comprised of 3 sections. DJ ill, dropping the poops. Duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Duodenum is the entryway. Jejunum does most of the work. Ileum ties up the loose ends. We then pass through the ileocecal valve and enter the cecum. Now, I'm going to relocate my little path here. So we have So we passed through the ileocecal valve into the cecum. We now have a choice. From the cecum, we can go down into the appendix, but if you go to the appendix, that's a dead end and it's a one-way. Once you go in, you stay. We can head up from the cecum into the ascending colon. We then make a hard 90-degree turn towards the medial aspect and enter the transverse colon. The transverse colon makes a 90-degree inferior turn. We then enter the descending colon. Oops. Descending colon transforms into the sigmoid colon. Again, it's only noticed by a turn in the direction of the tube. Sigmoid colon ends in the rectum. We're looking at about the last 6 inches or so. And the anus. Your next stop is in the American Standard, the porcelain throne. Okay. Whew. Any questions over what we've covered so far?
And the bacteria that live in our stomach, where is that located? Is that throughout the whole lining of the stomach?
Only in the large intestine.
Only large intestine.
Only in the large intestine. So remember we talked about that symbiosis thing, right? We give them room and board and food, and they poop out vitamin K for us. Part of our agreement is we get first dibs on the food. So we've absorbed most of the nutrients in the small intestine. By the time we let those bacteria get their chance at it, we've already taken everything we need. All that happens in the large intestine. Good question. All right. So let's take a break. We'll do, it's 3 o'clock, we'll do 15 minutes. We'll come back in 15 and we will begin the second slideshow portion. Good stuff? I'm ready for a break. I don't know about you guys. All right. Come on. All right. I'm going to pause the recording. We'll take a break. I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. I'll see you guys back in here at 3:20. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So we are going to pick up right where we left off. We are starting the second PowerPoint for the digestive system. And the first thing we're looking at here is the control of the nervous system. So most of the control of the nervous system is going to come, of the digestive system will come from the nervous system. So the control through nerves, which will innervate the smooth muscles, the glands that are secreting enzymes and other digestive juices and things like that. We are monitoring information from chemoreceptors and stretch receptors, which will initiate reflex arcs, which just keep the food moving on track. We are also looking at autonomic nervous system influences like smooth muscle contraction and secretion. Many hormones will be released to control digestion. The stomach releases a few hormones, the pancreas mainly. And other local chemicals will be secreted along the digestive tract, which will influence nearby cells. Local chemicals, thinking about like pancreatic juice, or talking about things like stomach acid, hydrochloric acid, things of that nature. So our food intake is controlled mainly through the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the organ that is generally maintaining our balance between hunger and satiety. So satiety is the quality or condition of being satiated, of being satisfied. It's the feeling that you feel after a meal when you feel full and you do not want to eat anymore. So balancing that sensation from the sensation you were feeling just before you ate when you were very, very hungry and probably ravenous. The hypothalamus will secrete different hormones, which will regulate things like increasing food intake, which would be stimulated by low blood sugar. And it would be inhibited by a hormone called leptin, produced by your fat cells, which would decrease the food intake. So when your blood sugar gets high, or your amino acids in your blood get high, when we're feeling like we've got a lot of nutrients, we'll trigger this signal that tells the body that we are satisfied, we're full. There are many changes that occur in the digestive system as we age. Mainly, it's just that the body produces fewer digestive juices. So for many people, digestion becomes more difficult, particularly for foods that require more digestion, like raw fruits and vegetables. So many people, as they age, will tend to avoid salads and raw foods just because it's a lot harder for them to digest them. It may cause digestive difficulties like flatulence or diarrhea, constipation, things like that. We also become less capable of absorbing those nutrients, like the actual absorption process is lessened. Therefore, we usually recommend, as people enter into older age, that they start supplementing their diet with vitamin and mineral supplements. If you're only absorbing a small amount of nutrients, then the idea is increase the overall amounts of nutrients so that the little bit that you are absorbing, you're getting everything that you need. And since your muscles are not functioning at their prime when we hit that ripe old age, the action of peristalsis begins to slow. So digestion can take longer to actually move material from one end of the tube to the other. Now, massage also has effects on the digestive system, particularly when we get to the large intestine. We know that massage stimulates the parasympathetic system, right? Normally, we are thinking about it in terms of fight or flight, right? We're trying to get the body out of fight or flight mode. We're trying to turn off Spider-Man and turn on Peter Parker, the parasympathetic mode. Increased parasympathetic stimulation will improve digestion. Remember, because we're also talking about where the blood is going. So when Spider-Man is turned on, the blood is going to the skeletal muscles. When Peter Parker is turned on, we restore blood flow to the digestive organs and the reproductive organs. Abdominal massage can also help relieve constipation by manually introducing movement into the tissue. We can, with our hands, kind of simulate the movement of peristalsis and just push all that stuff on about its way. Now, the protocol for this, guys, if we look at what we're doing, your strokes will use a circular clockwise movement, and you will slowly migrate this circular motion along the path of the large intestine. So we begin at the cecum, we then follow along the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colons. So we are starting at the beginning of the large intestine using a circular movement, and your movement is clockwise, and the overall movement is also clockwise, tracing the flow of the large intestine. This helps ease constipation, but just a heads up, if you decide to just do this on your client, you may want to give them a heads up, because you'll end the constipation swiftly So please make sure that they are nearby a commode somewhere where they can get off the table and go, because when you do this whole process, it'll take 10, 15 minutes or so of just nice gentle massage, but believe me, it kicks things into high gear. They're going to need to go. So the next thing that we want to talk about is metabolism. Now, metabolism is the overall process. And before we get too bogged down and stuff, metabolism is the overall process. There are two phases to metabolism. And to think about this, just think for a moment about a cheeseburger. So you've got a cheeseburger sitting here in front of you. What can your body do with this cheeseburger? Nothing. Your body cannot do anything with the cheeseburger as it is right now. We have to do stuff to it, right? Number one, we have to chew it up, mix it into like a paste. We got to swallow it, mix it with digestive juices, and break all that stuff down, right? We have to take the big meat patties and the slice of tomato and the bun, and we have to break them down into smaller units, right? We talked about amino acids and fatty acids and simple sugars. Those are the materials that the body can actually use. So the first thing we have to do is break everything down. This is the phase known as catabolism. This is the breaking down of large molecules into smaller ones. The other byproduct of this, guys, is when you tear molecules apart, you release energy, stored energy. Now, the other phase of metabolism is what your body does next. So now your cells have their groceries delivered to them on the bloodstream river. So they pick up their groceries and they bring them into the cell. Now the cells have basic amino acids, we have fatty acids, we have little simple sugars and things like that. So now we've got the material. Now what does your cells need to do with them? We need to create molecules that your body can use, right? We've taken cow meat. Now we need to turn it into human meat, right? We've taken fat from cheese. We need to turn it into a fat that the body can use. So once we've broken down the food into the simplest elements, the next phase is the building up. We take these little Lego bricks that we've split apart and we reassemble them into larger molecules that the body can actually use. This is known as the anabolic phase or anabolism. So when we take two of these atoms and we lock them together in a molecule, we are storing energy in the form of chemical potential energy. We have the energy in there and we could release it if we wanted to. All you have to do is break the molecule apart. When you break the molecule apart, we release all of that energy. These two phases of metabolism are always happening in the body. The two together are always happening. Your body is not in one mode or the other. Both are always occurring at different areas in the body, and the entire process all together, right? The taking the hamburger and breaking it down and then digesting and absorbing it, and then assimilating those materials into the body as new structures, repairing and rebuilding. The whole process is metabolism. For some individuals, this process happens at a very fast rate, just naturally. These are the people we say that have a fast metabolism. These are the ones that we are all jealous of, who could eat an entire pizza and drink liters of soda every day and they never gain any weight, because as fast as they are consuming calories, their body is just burning them. And then there are those of us who have slightly slower metabolisms, or fun fact for the youngins in the class, just in case no one has warned you yet, 25 years old. When you hit 25 years old, your metabolism comes to a crash and frickin' halt. You still enjoy eating like you were a teenager, enjoy it while it lasts. 25 will hit you in the face. Well, it'll hit you in the hips and the gut and the underarms. Right around the age of 25 to 30, your metabolism begins to slow, and it will continue to gently decline as we ease into middle age and older age. So this is why teenagers can eat literally whatever they want and they just don't gain weight. And then those of us who are not so lucky can just look at a cake and gain 5 pounds. So what you're looking at here is a difference in the rate of metabolism, how quickly someone's body can digest and assimilate and purge food in the entire process, the whole process. Good stuff?
And there's no way to like regenerate your metabolism at all, like through exercise or anything like that?
For some people, they could probably, well, here's, I do not believe that there is any way to reliably and consistently change one's basal metabolic rate. So whatever your baseline, I don't really think that there's a way that you can change it for good. You know, you can go on a fast or a special diet or something like that and change it in the short term, but when you stop the fast or you stop the diet, your basal metabolic rate will return to whatever is normal for your body. So I would say the short answer is no. There are little ways that you can boost metabolism, like exercise and changing your diet and things like that, but not permanently, no. So this slide just simply encapsulates what I just explained. We have the catabolism process where we take a large molecule and break it into smaller pieces, releasing energy. Then we have the anabolic phase where we take those small parts and we store energy by constructing these larger molecules. Also, by the way, this is where the word comes in. If you've ever heard of those bodybuilders that were busted taking anabolic steroids, those are chemicals that interfere with the anabolic phase of metabolism and increase the rate at which we repair and we rebuild our muscle structure. So when you're working out a lot and then you take anabolic steroids, you build up larger muscles much faster than if you weren't. But remember, when you stop taking the steroids, your rate of anabolic metabolism returns to normal. So that's what I'm saying. It's not permanent. It's just as long as you're taking them, it increases. But when you stop taking the steroids, it returns to normal. So there is no like permanent way of changing your metabolic rate. It's a base rate for a reason. So carbohydrates, as I said, all carbohydrates rhyme with sugar. We can look at simple sugars or refined sugars like sodas and candies and sweets, which will, when ingested, create a very quick spike in your blood pressure. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, thinking about things at the bottom of the food pyramid, rice, bread, grains, pasta, cereals, oatmeal, things like that, those carbohydrates are complex. The molecules are physically larger and more chained in long chains rather than in small, simple links. So complex carbs, because they take longer to digest, you have a blood sugar spike that is much slower and more gradual. But carbohydrates are sugars and starches. They are all sugar. At the end of the day, when they are broken down into their constituent parts, it is just different versions of the same thing. It's sucrose, dextrose, sucralose, fructose, galactose, whatever it is, it's just different types of sugar. Sugars, your body will convert almost all of them into a single type of sugar called glucose, and glucose is the default sugar. Any fancy sugars that your body encounters, they will generally convert them into glucose, which is a very common, every cell in your body can burn glucose, and that is the sugar that we burn. Carbs also provide the cellulose, the fiber that is in your diet, and not to get too personal, but fiber is what is responsible for the solidity and the bulk of your stool. So if you've got a lot of like loose, runny, watery stools, you just incorporate more fiber into your diet, and it just helps kind of bind all that stuff together. Fiber is important in defecation because it keeps your stool shaped properly so that it moves about instead of just being this like loose, watery mess. And then other elements of sugar are used to form nucleic acids. Like the backbone of your DNA is the nucleic acids are based on glucose. So sugars are used as a backbone to incorporate your DNA into a single molecule. They're used for glycoproteins. Sugars are used in forming cell membranes, and your cells use them for all kinds of different stuff. I mean, it's basically like plastic. Your cells just use them for everything. So the digestion of carbs, we've talked about this already. It starts in the mouth with the enzyme amylase. It continues in the small intestine. The small intestine produces a different enzyme called maltase. They are broken down into their constituent parts, and they are absorbed in the small intestine as monosaccharides. Monosaccharides, literally single sugars. We are looking at a single molecule of the sugar. As I also said, when most of those monosaccharides, those variety of sugars, reach the liver goes to work converting them all into glucose. Glucose is your body's default sugar. It is easily burned by every cell in the body. Some cells can burn different types of sugar, but they all burn glucose. So your liver just turns everything it can into glucose. Glucose is then carried by the bloodstream to all of your body's major cells, and blood glucose enters the cells through facilitated diffusion. Now, once the glucose is in the bloodstream, your body will kind of hidey hole. You guys know how people will have like toothpicks or something stored all over their house, something that they use all the time. They'll store little bits everywhere. Your body uses sugar for literally everything. Your muscle cells will store quantities of glucose within the muscle cells to use for energy. Your nervous system cells, so brain and spinal cord, store large amounts of glucose in their vacuoles so that they have easily available energy ready to burn. Your liver also stores glucose, but when your liver stores glucose for long term, it converts it into, is it glycogen? I believe it's glycogen. And you can think of glycogen as like a shelf-stable form because your liver's storing it for long term. So it will convert glucose to glucogen or glycogen. It can store glycogen for a long time. And then when we need to burn it, we can turn the glycogen back into glucose and then just release it into the bloodstream. So when we talk about facilitated diffusion, what we're talking about is the transfer of the sugar molecules from within the small intestine through the wall of the small intestine and then out into the capillaries on the other side. This is a fancy little diagram that explains it to you. The only thing on here, if you read through this little chart, this little diagram, most of the stuff should make sense. The only thing that I do want to clarify is this word lumen. If we were to take the tube and cut it like this, so that you have the wall of the small intestine and then the inside of the small intestine. When we talk about the lumen, we are talking about the diameter inside the tube. So the diameter of the width of the tube that your digestive stuff is flowing through, not including the wall itself. So we're not measuring from outer wall to outer wall. The lumen is the measure of the diameter from inner wall to inner wall. Clear? We use the same word for blood vessels. So that like the inside of a blood vessel is the lumen. And if a blood vessel has like atherosclerosis and there's fat clogging the artery, then the fat clogging the artery like that has reduced the lumen. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Now, the danger there, just like putting your thumb over the end of a garden hose, right? When you decrease the lumen, you increase the pressure. So in a blood vessel, that's a really bad thing because the presence of that thing increases your blood pressure, just like sticking your thumb over the end of a garden hose. So, but oh, there it is. I was right. Glycogen. Glycogen is formed of glucose. It is the stored version of glucose. Just think of it as like we package it and stick it on a shelf. We make it shelf stable. You can think of we pickled it or we canned it or we jarred it or whatever. We've preserved the sugar in a way that allows us to store it for later. We convert the glucose into glycogen. This conversion is stimulated by insulin, and it occurs in every cell, but it's particularly happening in your liver and in skeletal muscle. Liver and skeletal muscle. This is primarily where we store glycogen, which again is just shelf-stable sugar. Now, lipids, fats are formed by triglycerides from glucose. So we use sugar to weave our way into fat molecules. This is done in liver and fat cells. This is also stimulated by insulin. And the liver is able to convert glucose into non-essential amino acids. So we can also use sugars to synthesize proteins. Well, amino acids. We turn sugar into amino acids. And then we can turn amino acids into different proteins. But the key word there, guys, is non-essential. Right? These are the things that your body is able to make on its own. There are still essential amino acids that your body cannot synthesize. Any questions so far? Cool. So, what is going on in the cells when we talk about bringing the cells food and everything and all of these metabolic processes that are the building up and the breaking down and what's going on here? So, if we recall when we were talking about the anatomy of muscle cells and the muscular system and how muscles work, you guys will recall we talked about cellular respiration. There was the aerobic and anaerobic. It happened in the presence of oxygen or with a lack of oxygen. Is this ringing a bell for you guys? Okay. So cellular respiration occurs within the mitochondria. And this is where we talk about like the citric acid cycle, or we talk about the Krebs cycle, aerobic cellular respiration. We're all talking about the same thing. These are just different names for the same process. The citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle is the cycle of cellular respiration whereby we produce energy in the form of heat. These are the 4 byproducts of the Krebs cycle, like the whole point of the cycle. We produce energy in the form of heat. We produce a small amount of H2O. We produce a small amount of carbon dioxide, CO2. And we synthesize a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. So these are the 4 results that you get from aerobic cellular respiration, or the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. These are the results of the cycle. ATP was the whole stinking point. The whole reason we went through all of this was to synthesize energy in the form of ATP. That is not a waste. That is the point of the process. We are going to hold on to that. We're going to store that for later. That's energy. We're going to use that. H2O is a byproduct of this reaction, but water is valuable to us. We are not going to waste it. We are going to capture and recycle that water. That will get recycled and used. CO2, on the other hand, that's a straight up byproduct. There is nothing we can do with CO2. It is poisonous in large amounts. So we diffuse the CO2 into the bloodstream. It will be carried to the lungs and exhaled. That is a waste. It will get excreted. H2O will get recycled. ATP was the whole stinking point. The last bit that we have is the energy in the form of heat. And this is a tiny little thermometer, but that energy that is released in the form of heat, that is how we maintain our body temperature. That is how we stay at 98.6 degrees. So when we get an infection and our metabolic rate goes up, that is what a fever is you've increased the rate of production of ATP. When you increase the rate of production, we make more energy, but we produce more heat, so the body temperature rises. That is how the mechanism of fevers works. Glycogenolysis, whenever you hear the ending of that word, lysis, that just means like a tearing or a breaking apart. We're destroying something. In this case, what we are destroying is glycogen. This takes glycogen from the liver and transforms it into glucose. So this is the name of the process that we use to turn that shelf-stable sugar into actual usable sugar. It's stimulated by the hormones glucagon and cortisol. Both of those hormones break down glycogen to form glucose. So they turn shelf-stable sugar into ready-to-use sugar. We put it in the bloodstream and cells can dig in. Proteins are important because they are used to make enzymes. So if we recall, enzymes are protein structures that are used to initiate or accelerate or control chemical reactions within cells. Enzymes are extremely specific about the reactions that they control, and they are reusable. So we can use the same enzyme over and over and over to trigger multiple different chemical reactions, but usually only one kind of reaction. Enzymes are super specific. Proteins are used to make enzymes. They're also used to weave collagen fibers. They're used to make membrane receptors, right? Like those little voltage gated channels or the sodium ion pumps, all of those little membranes along the cell that allow things to go in or out. Those are all constructed of different types of proteins. The body requires protein intake because we need those essential amino acids that we can't make for ourselves. And proteins also provide energy. The chemical process of digestion for proteins begins in the stomach. Proteins are pretty easily digested, so we don't need the extra effort in the mouth. We can start in the stomach properly. One of the main enzymes is called pepsin, and it breaks proteins down into smaller peptides and amino acids. Since we're talking about pepsin, by the way, you guys, amino acids are also called peptides. So when you chain amino acids together, you create a structure known as a polypeptide, like a polypeptide chain. A polypeptide chain is a protein. We're talking about the same thing. We're using different words to describe the same kind of thing. So I like to think of like a beaded necklace, and based on the type of beads and how they're strung together, right? The beads are the amino acids or peptides, and the order that you bead them onto the string defines the kind of polypeptide or protein that you're making. Proteins are, it's their actual three-dimensional shape. It's the physical shape of the protein is what makes them useful. They, like a key and a lock, is determined by the physical shape of the key and the physical shape of the lock. Various proteins have distinct shapes that will interact with other molecules or not if they're not the right shape. Now, all of your body cells will use amino acids because all of your cells are made of protein. So they need all these different amino acids to synthesize the various proteins that your cells need to repair and rebuild themselves. They may need to grow new structures. It may be time to reproduce. So they will undergo a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluco referring to the sugar, neo meaning new, genesis meaning creation. So gluconeogenesis, the creation of new sugars. We can take protein and turn them into sugar. Glucose can be made from amino acids. We can use amino acids to synthesize glucose. This occurs in the liver. It's stimulated by cortisol and glucagon. Now, fats, demonized by nutritionists and many doctors. Fats are vital, they are necessary. Many fats are healthy. There is no way around it, you guys. You need fat in your diet for proper nervous system function, for proper digestion, for proper muscular contraction. Remember the myelin sheath that insulates nerve fibers? Myelin is made of fat. Remember how your nerve cells, like your nerves themselves, like to have energy sources readily available. We stick fats in the nerve itself so that the nerve cells have access to energy. Fat is everywhere in your body. It is vital. It is not a bad guy. There are bad types of fat, but healthy fats are absolutely required. Healthy fats will come from animal and plant sources. Think avocados, think olives, olive oil, your healthy oils. Oily meats like salmon, red meat, eggs, things of this nature. Fats are also used to build the phospholipid bilayer of your cell membranes. It's like, what are your cell membranes made of? Fats. They are made of 2 layers of fat stuck together. Fats are also used to make cholesterol and steroid hormones like glucocorticoids, your gluco, I've lost my train of thought. The steroids that are produced in your adrenal glands, their molecules are based on fat. So, chemical digestion of fats begins in the mouth. Most of it takes place in the small intestine. Fats are absorbed by your small intestine as fatty acids, and it is there that they enter the lymph capillaries, also known as, my handwriting is terrible on that, sorry. Lacteals, specialized lymphatic capillaries that interface in the small intestine so that your body can put nutrients directly into the lymphatic system. Lacteals. Fats are going to be carried by the blood, converted into lipoproteins in the liver. So your liver is capable of transferring fatty acids and synthesizing proteins from them. We can use triglycerides for energy. Again, that's the normal reason for fat is burned for energy. But excess triglycerides will be stored as fat, as adipose fat. And this is where too much fat in your diet becomes dangerous. Again, your body absolutely requires fat for its everyday functioning. But if we end up with too much fat, we will store it. Your body cannot store large amounts of sugar, right? Your liver and your muscles can store sugar, but that's about it. Fat cells can be stored almost anywhere. And your body has a few select places where it really likes to store fat. The first place and the most obvious is right on the belly, right? The abdominal fat that is carried by a lot of men, right, with the beer bellies, that is the more dangerous type of fat. It's not just in the abdominal wall. Your body will continue to put fat in between your organs, so your organs become wrapped in fat. The fat storage spreads along the sides. That's where you get the love handles from, and then into the lower back. We also will store fat in the hips and thighs. For visceral fat tends to be more of a male trait. Men tend to store fat in the organs, which is the most dangerous place to store it. Females, on the other hand, tend to store fat subcutaneously under the skin. So women tend to store the extra fat in the breast tissue, in their hips and thighs, under, like in this flab of their underarm. That tends to be where women store most of their fat. It's unsightly, but it's the healthier place to put fat because it's not interfering with the function of your abdominal organs. For men, excess visceral fat starts choking out your organs and it starts wreaking havoc on your system. That's the kind of obesity that kills you. It's the visceral fat, not the subcutaneous fat, typically, that's causing more problems. So either way, your body will store fat. It will not typically store sugar in that fashion. So fat is what we see. When you look at a body that is storing a lot of energy, it's storing all that energy in the form of fat. So you tend to see larger bodies. Now, there are ways of triggering the burning of fat. We've talked about that. But remember, as carbohydrates are your body's first choice always. So if there are sugars available, your body will always default to burning sugars first. We will always store fat over sugar. Good stuff? Good stuff. So next up on our list is vitamins. Vitamins are almost all essential, meaning you have to get them from your diet. There are very few vitamins that your body can synthesize naturally. Vitamins are usually classified into, the main way we usually classify them is as water soluble or fat soluble. So fat soluble vitamins will be stored in the fatty tissues. We're looking at vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. Vitamin A is helpful in, I'm trying to think what vitamin A does. Eyesight, eyes use vitamin A, bones use vitamin D. Vitamin D is used to help bind calcium. Vitamin E has to deal with the keratinization of your skin. So vitamin E helps with healthy, resilient skin and other types of elastic tissue. Vitamin K is used in blood clotting factors. Now, since the body retains vitamins and we store these kinds of vitamins, if you get too much of them, they can become toxic. Remember the old adage from toxicology? An old adage from toxicology is the dose makes the poison. Everything is poisonous in the right amounts, right? Water will kill you in the right amounts. So when you're looking at things like vitamins, yes, we absolutely need vitamin A, but you can also have too much of it. And too much of it will start to wreak havoc on your system. Water soluble, you're looking at B complex vitamins. So like vitamin B, that's why you can deliver it under the tongue, because it's water soluble. It'll dissolve into the saliva in your bloodstream. Vitamin C, which is citric acid, you get it from citrus fruits like oranges and grapefruits and things like that. Niacin, biotin, folic acid, those are put in prenatal vitamins to make sure that the baby fetus grows a skeleton like he's supposed to. Water soluble vitamins are easily absorbed by the digestive tract, but we can't store them. They're water soluble, so they dissolve really easily, but we excrete them through the urine. So they come in easy, but they leave very easily. Fat soluble vitamins are the ones that can be stored for later. Minerals. So vitamins are organic. Vitamins are living things that we need. Minerals are inorganic substances. These are the kinds of nutrients, when you look at your nutrition facts, all the names that you recognize from the periodic table in chemistry class, right? Things like iron or magnesium or sodium or you know what I'm talking about, chlorine, sulfur, all of those things, all the fun stuff. Copper, right? Zinc. Minerals are inorganic substances. Your bodies need them in order to incorporate them into other types of molecules. The best example, clearest example is iron. Why do you need iron? Because it's in your hemoglobin. It's essential to the molecule that binds to oxygen. So when we talk about blood carries oxygen around the body, we do it because of the iron that's in the hemoglobin. Without iron, we can't make blood. Well, we can make blood, but it won't be functional. So normal minerals, things like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, iron, magnesium, zinc, copper, manganese, iodine. All minerals are essential, meaning your body cannot make minerals. Those elements on the periodic table are forged in the heart of exploding supernovas. We cannot make them with our puny little human chemistry. You need, in order to forge heavier elements, you need the unbelievable temperature and pressure of exploding stars. That is where all of those things are made. So all minerals are essential. We cannot synthesize any minerals in our body. Our chemistry does not work that way, sorry. So your basal metabolic rate. So this is kind of touching in on Zebedee's question earlier about how, is there anything that we could do to change our metabolic rate? The short answer is basically no. Now, the more refined answer is your metabolic rate changes all on its own. It fluctuates throughout the day. It's faster in the afternoon. It's slower in the middle of the night. It changes based on age, which again, we talked about teenagers. Teenagers have crazy high metabolisms because their bodies are actively growing and developing. Everything is new. We're building and growing new structures all the time, which means we need tons of energy. Once you hit 25, 30, your body is done growing, right? Development is done. Right around the end of adolescence, right? The early adulthood, 25, 30 years old. Now the only focus is maintenance. You've grown and developed all you're going to. All we do now is maintain. That takes a lot less energy, which means your metabolic rate will slow down. It's also influenced by muscle activity, food digestion. So your metabolic rate increases when you exercise. It increases when you eat. It increases based on age and sex, fever, stress, all these things affect it. Your basal metabolic rate for most people averages about 1,500 calories per day. Calories, remember, is a measure of the unit of energy. So how many calories are in some food? It's a measure of how much energy you get out of the food. So for most people, most bodies require somewhere around 1,500 calories a day, just basics, just to keep you breathing, keeping your heart beating, keep you walking around, like you're not exercising, not straining yourself. We're just talking about how much energy does your body need just to keep the lights on? About 1,500 calories a day, give or take, give or take. If you are a larger dude, right, like a guy who's got some muscle on him, you're probably, 6'4", 6'5", your basic calories for the day is probably going to be closer to 2,000 or more. But if you're a 5 foot tall female, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, and you're small framed petite female, you may need as little as 1,000 calories just to maintain every day. Yeah. All right. I think that's about everything that I wanted to say about metabolism. And we've reached the end of our slideshow. So does anybody have any questions or anything that we would like to go back over or talk about? We have covered everything for the day.
I might have missed something, but the slide on fats said it had a bullet that said stimulated by cortisol. And I wasn't sure if that meant metabolism is stimulated or, okay.
Yes, the metabolism of fats are stimulated by glucagon and cortisol. Glucagon, recall, was produced by the pancreas in response to elevated blood sugar. So when glucagon is present, we will start taking those fats and taking those sugars and converting them into fat as a way to get the sugar out of the bloodstream. We store it as fat. And then cortisol, a stress hormone, will start to trigger the conversion of those fatty acids into glucose. So we have fat molecules laying around and we need to burn energy. We won't use fat. We'll just turn them into sugar because we can burn sugar. Remember, your body will, the shortest route to sugar, your body will always go for the shortest route to sugar. So if we have fatty acids laying around, we're not going to turn them into fat and then turn them into something else. We're just going to turn the fatty acids into sugar. We can turn amino acids into sugars as well. Gluconeogenesis. Good stuff. All right. Any questions over what we have gone over? I can't hear you when you all talk at once. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, then this has been AMP3. I was your instructor, Dave Holden. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. There is no weekly quiz for the digestive system. So the next assignment that you guys will need to do is the final. As I said at the beginning of class, your final will cover endocrine, digestive, and reproductive systems. I would study every single thing that we have talked about in this class today about the digestive system. This lecture is being recorded. I will get this uploaded to YouTube and posted on Moodle as soon as I can. But it may be tonight or tomorrow morning before the recording is posted. But by tomorrow night, I promise, by tomorrow night, the recording will be posted on Moodle.
Thank
Anything
you.
else, guys? My pleasure. My pleasure.
You have a good
If you
weekend.
guys enjoyed this class, I'm teaching a assessment and application next term. I'm teaching kinesiology lowers. I'm teaching palpation skills, communication and ethics, and AMP3 again. So none of you guys should have to retake this course, but if you enjoyed it, I'm teaching lots of other classes next term. I look forward to seeing you guys again in person with no masks. It'll be awesome.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
You guys have a wonderful night.
You're gonna be
Thank
here
you so
beyond
much.
next quarter though, right?
Say again?
You're gonna be here beyond next quarter though, right? Because I'm
Oh,
not
of course.
starting those classes until the following quarter.
Oh, yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay.
I just bought a house. I'm staying.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thanks. Thanks.
It's awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, I like it. We lucked out with this one though. It's a good house.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Have a wonderful night, you guys.
You too.